Hey, this is Synpax, and I'm doing an Aslain's walkthrough. If I make any mistakes, just let me know in the comments, and I'll put the corrections in the description below the video. This is going to focus solely on the functional mods, things that do something to improve your game, not at all on aesthetics that add anime or make the ships more historical or any of that stuff. I first want to thank Access General, who year or two ago walked me through Aslain's, so I'm hoping I can pay it forward here. Now, the way the mod packs work is that they are tied to the version of Warships that you're playing. So if Wargaming releases an update to Warships, even a very small one, even a very micro one, you're still going to have to come back and update your mod pack again. Fortunately, Aslain does a great job staying on top of this. Usually has the new mod pack up within at least a day or so, sometimes in a few hours. But the nice thing also is that the mod pack remembers all the previous mods you had installed, so you don't have to go through and check all the boxes again. It should have a pretty good recollection of the ones that you had installed previously, and will just install an updated version. Now, in downloading it, first you have to go to aslain.com. I want to make it clear that it is aslain.com, not aslains.com, which is a malware site where sometimes someone will just say go to Aslain's, or they hear the S at the end of the name, they go to Aslain's, and they end up getting a virus. So you definitely want no S, aslain.com. And you're going to want to come down here and go to the Warships mod pack. And on this page, you're going to see a few different download options. Now, these primary download links are they go to somewhat scammy sites that can sometimes confuse new users. You don't know what to click on, so I just encourage you to click the direct link. Once you've downloaded that file and initialized it, you will get something that looks like this. And I'm going to go through all of the mods that I installed that I find to be of particular value. First, though, you're going to want to make sure you've got Show Preview window enabled so you know what you're installing. Now, this next screen where it shows the changelog is pretty important, because here's where you see the new mods that have been added. It's a little hard to pick them out of a list of several hundred, so if you could see here that, hey, this is a new mod that's of interest to me, like session stats or something like that, you'll be able to keep a lookout for it when you go through the installation. Obviously, you've got to put the correct installation directory, which it usually has by default. And here we have a nice long list of mods, and I'm going to go through each of these that I find that really help out in the game. Over here is going to be the preview window, but as useful as down here in this area, you'll find text describing the mod, maybe what it does, and a link, say, to that mod's homepage, which more often than not is a post on a Warships forum. So scrolling down from the top, first thing we want is the side panel by AutoSpy. This has a few different configurations that shows you the expected values on the ships that you're going to run into. You can see down here, I prefer running the number 3, which shows me, in addition to detectability by land and air and the speed, also the expected or default anti-air value, which is somebody who's trying to learn carriers is particularly helpful of what ships I want to, maybe engage the Bismarck before I engage the Kurfürst. It also shows you the reload time for different guns. So if you look at the torpedo reload here for Hindenburg, you can see that the range of the torpedoes is 60, and on the other side of it is the default reload time. Moving along, there are a lot of crosshair options here, but I don't find them to be of use at all. But what I do find of use is the rangefinder, to make it a little bit more visible and easier to identify. It stands out a little bit more. So I usually go with default green, but you can choose a different color if you want. It just makes it a little bit, these values a little easier to see, especially now that Wargaming is adding additional numerical values. Like your own detectability here, it's helpful to have these numbers really pop. So I go with green myself. Next up is the zoom out mods, camera mods. Now I've been, as I mentioned, learning to play carrier, so I find the zoom out to 66 particularly helpful in that as carrier you can actually zoom out and see almost the entirety of the map. There's some other options here you might want to explore further that help with zooming in on your reticle, but to each his own. I also find the port zoom out to be kind of helpful. for getting a better look at your ship, as well as getting zoomed out, as well as zooming in particularly close. Over the target marker is particularly helpful. I go through one on the tactical map that shows me a little bit more about how many hit points these ships have left. Something that's particularly useful as well is the ship movement indicator. Now, this tells you whether or not the ship you have target locked is stationary, moving forward, or moving back. If you're on a ship with torpedo launchers, sometimes you can switch over and use that to try and take a guess. But if you're on a ship that doesn't have that, or you're in the midst of a gunfight, you don't feel like switching over, this is a particularly helpful mod to use. What I've noticed is that the default one does not work very well, or does not work at all, but the SMI version 3, or I'm sorry, version 4, works very well. I think that the colors stand a little bit better than Aslain's, which are this gray. Sometimes that fades in the background. So this very clear red, black, and green stands out. Next up is the Minimap mods. Now, these show custom minimap. The first one shows the custom minimap circles. I'm going to enlarge this so you can see a little bit better. So that rather than you having these odd dot marks, you get these really nice shades of where your detectability range, or your hydro range, or your radar range begins. You also get enemy target lines, which is helpful for having a good idea of what the true relationship is between your ship and the enemy ship, and enlarged ship names, which is kind of helpful on the minimap. Now, what's not mentioned here, and I'm going to talk about this in another video, is that there's a little X mark that starts showing up when you install these, where it drops an X mark exactly where your guns are pointing, or where your shots are going to land relative to your ship. So you've got your usual line, which is the default in the game, but this adds a little X so you can see where exactly those artillery rounds are going to land, and that becomes very helpful in stealth firing in cyclones, as well as helping to shoot at targets after they have gone stealth. I'll make another video about that subsequently, but it's quite helpful. Okay, next up are some port mods that I find helpful. Session stats. Now, I think that this one has a little bit of acrylic from Russian in it, at least here, but otherwise it's in English. It just sort of summarizes how you've been doing that session. Extended tech tree is nice to see the ships that you don't have yet. Compact carousel extended. This lets you make modifications easily to the ship you've got selected in port without having to click the tabs at the top, like exterior or modules or whatever. Clear vision is helpful because it gets rid of the needless black and white filter on ships you don't have yet. I've also started taking more visibly trained commander perks just so your eyes can more quickly identify the commander perks that you have selected. For dock appearance, most of these are aesthetic. Some of them you can see are quite huge in their download size. But the one that I do like, because it just makes it a little bit easier to assess the armor on the ship, is the dry dock Black Sea, which is like the regular Black Sea, but it's in daytime. It looks just a lot nicer. Okay, next up, on-screen battle display options, custom shell tracer contrails. I like the ones from BlackSkull because it just at a glance allows you to much more easily identify the incoming shot. And as you can see how your shots are landing a lot better to see what your dispersion is, or whether you're leading properly or not. This next one I find very helpful is that the way it is now, a lot of your important GUI elements are down here in the lower left. So you kind of, the time it takes to say throw your eyes down there and come back to whatever you're shooting at can make a difference. So I use move GUI elements 1 to put them all right here in the center. So everything I need to see is right here in the middle. And the throttle comes over here to the right side of the consumables. So it makes a lot more sense. It's a smarter heads-up display. Also, I like to move the ribbons to the center here because they wind up covering up sometimes some of the ship data from the AutoSpy that you've got in the top right here. So we just shift them over a little bit. I also prefer the smaller ribbons. No need for them to take as much space on the screen as they do now, especially given how much other crap we're throwing on the screen as it is with all of these mods. Color radiolocation marker. White is a little bit faint. I like the red. It just stands out a lot better. I don't have a preview. There's no preview of it here, but I prefer the red. It just makes it a lot more visible and stands out from everything else on the screen. Okay, this one is probably the most useful in all of Aslain. It's the Navigator mod, and I keep it mine in the center, right here. What it looks like, as you can see in the preview here, is it shows the exact angle of the ship you've got selected and your ship relative to them. This is helpful because sometimes the animation makes you think that you're broadside or close to it, but it's not close at all. And this becomes very apparent right in the center of your screen with the Navigator, and it tells you in exact numbers the article. It's also helpful if you got an American cruiser with AP, knowing that you can get away with a little bit more angling, or your enemy, you can still pen them even though they're showing a little bit more angle. So this actually changes colors between red, yellow, and green of your enemy ship, and it also sort of makes you aware of whether you're at that magic 30% or less, or if you're showing a little bit more than you need to. So incredibly helpful, and I place mine right dead center, so it's immediately below the targeting reticle. Smoke counter. This is particularly helpful. It shows the amount of time left on the first puff and the last puff. Sometimes, especially in the Pan-Asian destroyers, there can be a tremendous gap between these. And you've actually got a lot of time left in your last puff, but the first puff is already disappearing. So this is particularly helpful. Custom battle loading screen. I want to thank BFK for Life for bringing this one to my attention. This is particularly cool because it makes this really nice battle loading screen where you can see exactly where you are, where your whole team is, and your teammates all on a single screen, along with some basic stats. So I find this one to be particularly helpful. Also, choose your clan icons because right now there's sort of a third-party app that lets folks upload their clan icons, and it just allows you to glance to quickly identify who you're going up against. And I encourage you, if you're in a clan, to look at the details and upload your own 24 by 24-bit clan icon. It's just a nice touch to the game tool. It's something that Wargaming, I expect, eventually will put into the game. Should have already been in the game, but they can count on these third-party developers to handle it for them through mods. Okay, moving along. There's no need for this extra text on the side. It gets rid of it, so appreciate that. Team aware. This is very helpful. I found it to be quite helpful. I'm going to enlarge the graphic here so we can get a better look at it. It does a couple of things. First of all, it shows whether or not your teammates are detected by brightening them up in yellow the same way you're bright in yellow. The other thing it's helpful for is drawing lines on the minimap. I found this to be quite helpful in clan battles. So I often call clan battles so I can draw arrows saying I want you to exactly here at this island rather than having to guess or use imprecise grid locations. The problem though is that, or it's not really a problem, but the challenge is that everybody on your team also needs to be running this mod, or for anybody to see your markings or for you to see their whether or not they're in stealth or whether or not they're detected, they also have to have it installed too. And this is a relatively new tool. Again, this is something that ought to be in game, but it's incredibly helpful. And if you're a serious competitive clan, I'd encourage you to get all your teammates to have it installed. Next up, Regen Assistant. This is very helpful, especially when you're learning a ship. It tells you what the maximum repair is of your repair party, maximum amount it can repair with and without the flag, and it also shows you how much repairable damage you currently have. So ideally you want to only launch that repair when you can maximize its value, and this lets you know when that is. Next up, info panel on your enemy, which is kind of helpful. Just if you've got them selected, you can immediately determine whether how much further away from you they need to get before they're in stealth or not. It's also helpful to have it for yourself. This actually prevents you from having to press the H key, and this information is always here. This key stuff, which is particularly, if you jump around from a lot of different ships, you want to know immediately the range of your torpedoes, the reload on them, as well as, say, your secondary and anti-aircraft gun power. This is very helpful because it actually shows you how much of each you have left. So 3 out of 3, 6 out of 6 are identified down here. If you had secondaries, the same data would be showing. There's another mod, I don't actually use it, but it also shows the same data, but maybe in a more aesthetically pleasing way. Now, your screen may get quite cluttered depending on how many of these you put on, but just remember, most of these you can, using the control key and the cursor, drag and drop into different parts of your screen. Detailed damage meter, kind of helpful. I like to have that up to just see how much damage I've inflicted on different ships and how much they've inflicted on me. Improved chat. Now, there are different options here that show more, and more. I actually prefer the last option. Granted, it takes up the most screen space, but it's easiest to read at a glance to see who said what and what, who's giving instruction and what ship they're in. And remember, you can enlarge your chat panel in game, so you can just drag it up so it's a little bit taller. But this is quite helpful. I go with 4. You could probably get away with 3 or 2 even, or just 1. I do want to point out, there are a lot of cursor modifications in this, but all of them apply to static, not range. And let me correct myself. Targeting reticles. There are all kinds of different target reticle mods here, but again, if you're using dynamic, none of them work. They're all for static. So moving along, a lot of this stuff that we're passing by is aesthetic. I do find the Antiglare Fog Remover to be helpful, particularly depending on what the angle of the light is coming from. Sometimes it's very hard to see your torpedo launching range finder or movement finder. So I find this very helpful for that. Also, sometimes the glare just gets out of hand. The realism is a little too much, so this tones that down. Region changer can be helpful. I also think that the FPS limiter helps the game run a little bit more smoothly, because if the graphics card think it can run at some ridiculous frame rate, it may wind up slowing down the game otherwise. Now, I could be wrong about this, but I just think the game runs better when you set the FPS to something like 60. So it has a hard maximum. Now, there are also a series of external apps that you can install through this. 2 of them are particularly helpful, and we'll probably make a video on how to use them coming up. Those 2 are Matchmaking Monitor and MX Stat. However, because these apps do their own installations apart, or they do their own upgrade schedules apart from Aslain's upgrade schedule, I prefer to download these directly from the source and maintain them directly from the source. Still, I appreciate Aslain bringing these to my attention, as I almost always have them both running whenever I'm playing the game. So, I do want to suggest that if you find these helpful, that you appreciate the good work that Aslain has done, and either sign up on Patreon or throw them a few coins through PayPal. Also, I'm going to pimp my clan here. If you are a casual player looking for a really fun, politically incorrect group who enjoy trash talking, I encourage you on the NA server to apply to Iron X. We have this clan battle season. Everybody who's on gets to play, whether you've got a rental or not. It's a good way to learn. Next season we'll continue to do that with a developing clan, but we'll make a sub branch that's competitive, so we can start climbing that ladder. It's a really great group, and I encourage you to look us up. You can find us in game as Iron Cross or Iron X. We've got a Discord and all the other clan goodies, as well as a 100% built out port with every bonus you could want. So this is again Synpax from the North American server on World of Warships. I hope you found this video useful.